pray for his onward journey in spiritual life. I've known Prabhu for many years, and it's been such a joy to see his growth over the years. And it's such a big step, not only just for himself, but it's in fact a tremendous step for the whole family and the whole family lineage. So, Prabhu, we're just so happy for you that you got this mercy and good fortune, and praying for you for all good things to come ahead. Haribol. Thank you, Lish, also for being here today. His son. And my Masi is also here from Chicago. She's been here for the last couple months. And we are always grateful for her. She's such a pure, sincere soul. And I learn so much from her all the time in all my interactions. Palak, my wife, is also here. And we just finished 1 year of marriage, and so we've been reflecting on the last year. And we're looking forward to more opportunity for service of the Vaishnavas in the coming year. So I wanted to make today's focus, because it's a new year, it's always a good opportunity. I always think of the new year as a fresh start. What do people feel like when the January 1st rolls around? What are some feelings that people have? Feel free. In one word, what's a word that comes to mind when the new year comes?
Resolution.
Resolutions? Anything else? Reflection.
New start.
Yes, fresh start. I also think of it that way. Krishna consciousness, good. So, but what about Krishna consciousness? Sad, happy, excited?
Always your mood goes to Krishna. We serve the Krishna.
Yeah.
And always thinking like this. We live here only for the Krishna.
Yes, no, thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts when it comes to when they think of when this day rolls around on the new year?
Do more chanting.
More chanting.
Yeah, quality chanting.
Good.
Read more books.
Yes, good. And that usually we have to take some time to think and reflect. So this is
Stay away from the Vaishnava aparat.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
It's a very important thing to keep in mind and always remind ourselves. Yes, because this is the one thing that takes away all of our spiritual assets. That's one thing we'll be talking about today is Daidi Sampat, right? So that we should be gathering spiritual assets. And so everyone has shared some really nice reflections, excitement, opportunity. There's so much potential. There's a clean slate, right, in this new year. It also represents, for me, also there's a removing of this. Sometimes we carry a load from the past year, and so this is a great time to really, take that load off our shoulders, and really, we've been given the opportunity to really start fresh, and so we should see it as like we have this chance. Every day we have a chance to, give ourselves a new birth, but the new year is particularly that time where everyone has even more time, right? We get a day off today, right? So even we should take even that extra time to think about it. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because as living entities, whether we're coming to the temple or not coming to the temple, there's one common pursuit that binds us all. And what is that pursuit? Like, what are we all seeking? Association. Happiness, right? So some type of happiness, some type of meaning, some type of purpose. And so I always say that Bhakti Yoga, this practice of Krishna consciousness, is the time-tested solution for that solve for happiness, right? Because so many people are looking in different ways to how to seek this happiness. But I always say that Bhakti Yoga, this practice of Bhakti that we're doing, it's time-tested, meaning it stood the test of time, and it's still, it cannot be defeated as the topmost. And so we have this practice of Bhakti, and it's very natural for us to all be seeking happiness. Why? Because, in the Vedanta Sutra, it says that we're Ananda Mayo Pyasya, meaning we're like at the Ananda, we're actually, it's within us to be seeking happiness, right? We look at the properties of the soul, Satchit and Ananda always seeking ananda or happiness. So the question then is, where are we going for that happiness, right? If we all know that our pursuit is similar, and then if we all know that it's natural for us to be seeking happiness, so then the question is where we are going, right? And where do people naturally go? When we look out in the world, where are people looking for happiness? Some common things.
Their own sense desire.
Yeah, so sense desires, but specifically?
I mean, specifically, as an example,
Earning money.
Yeah, so money is a big one.
Alcohol.
Alcohol, intoxication.
Opposite gender.
Yeah, so relationships with the opposite gender. You've hit pretty much the big three. Fame, right? And so all of these things, money, intoxication, relationships, we see time and again, all we have to do if we ever want to recalibrate what we're striving for in life, we should look at people who have a lot of everything, right? We should look at people that have unlimited fame, unlimited wealth, and there's many people that we can see. And I always like the quote, Jim Carrey, he has this quote, he's like, everyone should strive for these things to eventually realize that it will not bring happiness, right? And so that is really the point, is that you can have unlimited amounts of all of these things, but still yet everyone is not happy. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he really points us in the direction of what is the goal of life. In his words, in Mahaprabhu's words, he says, Prema Pumarto Mahan, right? That in fact, the goal of life is to develop this love for God, for Krishna. That is in fact the goal of life, right? And even if we see that, if we look at the purport in Bhagavad Gita 3.7, it's, Prabhupada, he mentions this one term, Svarta Gati, right? That the goal of self-interest is to reach Vishnu, right? So we see here that in our Shastras, Mahaprabhu, they've made it very clear as to what the goal is. And so once we know what the goal is, then we have to figure out, okay, what's the means by which we get there, right? And so we have these processes of bhakti, right? So we have the 9 processes of bhakti. Can people name what the 9 processes of bhakti are? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Arshanam, Dasam, and Vandanam. Yes. Good. So we have these 9 processes of bhakti. And so what I wanted to focus today's class on, I actually had the book with me, but it's really, focusing on this going back to the basics of Shravanam and Kirtan, and really what it means to have, what it means to have strong sadhana. I think for me, the New Year is always a great opportunity to reflect on where my sadhana is and how we want to improve, because it's really, we know that any of the 9 processes are on its own standalone, can take one back to Godhead. But in terms of practicality, and Prabhupada has said, in terms of the most practical and most potent, Shravanam is really where everything starts. And so we really wanted to talk today about I want us to try to rediscover what it means for strong sadhana. And what I'll be taking out of today is from, Vaisheshika Prabhu, he's written a tremendous book. It's called Our Family Business. Has anyone read that book, or is anyone familiar with that book? Yeah. So Our Family Business, Vaisheshika Prabhu, and everyone has heard from Vaisheshika Prabhu before, or knows who this personality is. Very senior Vaishnava in our movement, and has been a stalwart for distributing Prabhupada's books. And what a great time to honor him also, because this is the Prabhupada Marathon, and he's leading a worldwide movement to, I'm sure everyone knows about the efforts that are going to distribute Bhagavad Gitas. The goal is 3 million Gitas? Is that what it is during this month of this Prabhupada Marathon? And Toronto as a city has taken on the challenge, which just accomplished yesterday, of 26,000 Gitas to distribute. Right? And so that was just accomplished yesterday. And typically the devotees are pushing 110% until New Year's Day to try to achieve the goal. And so there is, I think before we get into going into improving our sadhana, I want us just to take us back. By Shikapuru, he talks about four qualities or four things that arise when we actually take to the practice of bhakti or devotional service very seriously. And I think these four things are nice to meditate on, because sometimes when we get into our practice, we need a why, right? The why we're doing it. And we need to remind ourselves of that why on a regular basis. And so Vaishnav, he speaks about these four, what the benefits are of having Shravan Sadhana. And he lists four things. And the first, he says that a sadhaka develops all good qualities. And when we develop good qualities, we become attractive to other people, right? And if we see in so many parts of the Gita, Krishna is talking about, especially in the modes of material nature, he talks about what are good qualities. But I'll specifically just read some qualities from 13:8 to 12. Yeah. This is the chapter Nature, Enjoyer, and the Consciousness. And it's basically listing incredible qualities: humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides else, whatever there may be, is ignorance. So again, here are just some few qualities that we develop once we take to a strong sadhana bhakti. And it's these qualities, in fact, make us attractive to other living entities. And that attractiveness is for people who are living in the lower modes. They need to be, we need to actually become attractive to the living entities for them to actually be attracted to take the bhakti, right? So this attractiveness is very important. But for us to become attractive, we have to become attracted to Krishna, right? And so but we develop these good qualities when we take the strong sadhana bhakti. The second thing he speaks about is that we develop taste, all things related to Krishna, and then the taste for sharing it with others. So this is the second benefit that comes about from strong sadhana, is this, we develop some taste, some satisfaction, some attraction, and then inherently we also have this satisfaction and taste to share it with others. The third quality that he speaks of as the importance of what we derive out of a strong sadhana is that we develop a deep attraction and affinity for hearing and studying the Shastra, the scripture. Because we really, all the answers are there in our Shastra, we just have to go searching for them. But that attraction to be able to go look, that also comes from our strong sadhana. And then the final thing he speaks about as we develop transcendental vision. So the way we can think about transcendental vision is this seeing with this equal vision, and specifically seeing that everything is in relationship to Krishna, right? In 435, we can see here, Krishna says that having attained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. And for by this knowledge, you will see that all living entities are but part and parcel of the Supreme. Or in other words, they are mine. And then further, in the Ishopanishad, in the 6th verse, it says, he who systematically sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord, who sees all living entities as his parts and parcel, and who sees the Supreme Lord within everything, never hates anything or any being. So again, this idea of what it means to have transcendental vision is to see how we are all one, how we're all connected, and to see that, in fact, we're all spiritual sparks or part and parcels of the Supreme. And that this transcendental vision of equal vision develops when we have that strong sadhana. And I think all of us can feel over time that as we've been chanting, as we've been practicing, we genuinely feel that sense of compassion. When we feel that sense of compassion for others, that to me is the litmus test for how we're developing this equal vision, that we want to help other people, that we actually have some pain when we see other people suffering, that we want to reach out and pull someone up, non-devotees, and even as we even taking on that sometimes challenge of supporting each other as devotees. This is all related to that transcendental vision of developing compassion. And this compassion, this is really what the world needs the most, as we see all the challenges and problems in our life. We should put on all of us that the way that, that means by which we're developing that compassion, as is said here, through this vision is through that strong sadhana. So then he further on goes into describing these components of what it means to have strong sadhana, and that's what we'll speak about for the rest of the class. And so what I'll do is I'll lay out all the different components, and then we'll talk about each one individually. So the first component, he says, is our attitude. The second component is regularity. The third is attentiveness. The fourth is goal setting. And the fifth is acting based on one's capacity, right? And so when we say attitude, I guess what is the first, attitude in reference to sadhana? Can anyone make a connection between these two ideas? Does anyone want to share any reflections?
Humility.
Humility, yes. Anything else?
Submissiveness.
Right?
Then no giving up.
Yeah.
Being compared.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting discipline.
Good, yeah. So we all, in the general world, it's understood that our attitude is everything. The attitude we bring to everything really determines everything else. And I really like this sutra that Vaishnav Prabhu has put together, but if we want to encompass our attitude in three very, succinct words, they're all coming from Prabhupada, but he's put it together nicely. He describes attitude in three terms: strict, serious, and sincere, right? So these three words can be thought of as a sutra, and when we think of these three words, they really encompass really what our focus can be. So strictness, let's talk about this word, strictness. Is that strictness refers to one's vigor, like the rigor of one's practice. Is that one needs to make this a focus, and that strictness means that it comes through. We deal with challenges as challenges come. So we see in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Raghunath Das Goswami, he speaks of what it means to be strict, and he referred to his devotional practices as lines on a stone, right? So Raghunath Das Goswami, he refers to his strict practice as lines of a stone. We know lines of a stone cannot be budged, it cannot be moved, right? And so that strictness must be there in one's practice. The second is seriousness, right? So in the term seriousness, he goes on to describe that seriousness refers to giving thought to the attention to our details in the way we practice. So thought to the details about how we practice. So to me, I think of a lot of times when I think of the thought to the details, is that we know that we have to chant ideally in the morning, but details to me would be how do we prepare for our sadhana the night before, right? So, do we, getting to bed at a certain time? Is our sleeping space, in its proper way? Is the environment set? So are we setting up ourselves to have good sadhana in the morning? These again are all details by which then we can have a strong practice, right? So again, that's one small example. But seriousness also was described here, is that when a challenge comes, that we don't back down from the challenge, and that we are not deterred by both distraction and temptation. So we see this example of the Dhruva Maharaj in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that when Kuvera, he comes and he actually wants to offer him a reward for all his tapasya. And what does Dhruva Maharaj do? He refuses, because his request is in fact unflinching devotional service and remembrance of Krishna. So here's an example of that in the face of some other reward. We see that Dhruva Maharaj was fixed, and this is in fact also a component of seriousness, is that when we're presented so many different options or distractions, that we still remind ourselves of what the goal is, which we talked about at the beginning. And this is what New Year's for us should be really all about, is just coming deeper in contact and reflecting on that goal and how we're aligning with that goal. So that is what he's referring to as seriousness, is that we are thoughtful about the details, and that we are ready to work through and face the challenges and the distractions that come. And the third part is sincere. So sincere, it comes from the word, the Latin word sincerus. And I always like Vaisheshika Prabhu, if everyone's seen his class, he always likes to look at the root meaning of a word. I really enjoy how he always has someone with a dictionary to look up a word, or he always goes back to the Latin term. And so he says that he was sharing here that this word sincere comes from the Latin word sincerus. And this word sincerus in the Latin word means clean, pure, and free from pretense or deceit. Right? This is in fact, so now we're elaborating on this word. What does this word sincere mean? And further on, he describes that to be sincere in one's devotional practice means we have to be subservient to Krishna, that we're in fact willing to put our seniors, our mentors, Krishna's terms for what it means to live a righteous and happy life, to put those terms in front of our terms, and to align with those as best as possible. So it means we follow Krishna's directives, and he's very specific. We follow directives without envy and without ulterior motive. This is what it means to be sincere. And we talk so many times about this word that sometimes we can't meet the mark. Prabhupada's given us such a high, lofty way of life, such a high example. But ultimately, if we can't meet the mark, or we're not hitting the standard, everything comes down to our sincerity. Everything comes down to our sincerity. So really meditating on what it means to be sincere, and just looking at this, how this term has been explained to us, free from pretense or deceit, and following Krishna's directives without envy or ulterior motive. Right? So now we've talked about the attitude. So what were the three terms that we talked about for attitude? What's the sutra?
Seriousness and sincerity.
Yes, right. So we can just remember these three words. If you forget everything else that I said today, just at least remember these three words, and automatically I feel like the 2023 can be a better year if we just take these three terms and look at our sadhana. I wanted to read one specific section that Prabhupada, he writes about sincerity in the Bhagavad Gita, because we always read from the Bhagavad Gita during these classes. This is in Bhagavad Gita 3.7. And he specifically says, a sincere person who follows this method is far better situated than a false pretender who adopts show bottle spiritualism to cheat the innocent public. A sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the charlatan meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. So again, it just comes back to, I love the word when we talk about sincerity, because it just simplifies spiritual life so much, right? We can talk about so much high philosophy, we can talk about so many rules and regulations, but it really just, sincerity just requires us to look within ourselves and just the state of our own consciousness and heart. Right? And so again, we're putting more emphasis on this because today's offering for Prabhupada and Sampradaya that I wanted to share is just how we can rediscovering strong sadhana. And then so the first component is attitude. The second is regularity. And so regularity, I think the term is self-explanatory. But Vaisheshika Prabhu writes, he says that when we do something regularly in devotional service, that it invokes purity, and over time it invokes faith, Shraddha, right? And we know that the first phase in one's spiritual life is Adau Shraddha, Tatau Sadhu Sangha, right? That, Vajna Kriya, and then we go through these phases. But in fact, even though we progress in our spiritual life, every day what we're doing, we're always building on that first step, Adau Shraddha. We're building on that. We're just trying to deposit more into establishing that stronger faith in the words of the Shastra, the words of the Guru, in Krishna's words. And that when we have this regular practice, this regular strong sadhana, that in fact our faith is, in fact, it grows through this process, and that purity develops, and that these are both pleasing to Krishna. Prabhupada, he wrote in a letter one time that Krishna is pleased to award the benediction upon the aspiring devotee engaged in his service with patience, determination, and regularity. So I thought about this. He was, Vaishnavu put this in different words, but with regularity, we become reliable. And when we become reliable, it's understood that what happens, people know, we become reliable, we all have different aspects of our life, we become reliable. And how does the world, how do people look at us when we become reliable? What does that invoke in others? Trust, exactly, right? Faith and confidence. People have confidence in us when we become reliable, when we become steady, when we become regular. And it's such a powerful thing. There's nothing, I always say there's nothing fashionable about being consistent, but consistent, and many times people say consistency can be boring, but really great character is built on consistency and regularity. Even if it's simple to do what we've been asked to do by Krishna and the Guru on a regular basis, this is where real faith and confidence in others in ourselves is coming from. And we need to be the best vehicles we can be to share bhakti with others, right? So the onus is in fact on us. We shouldn't always say, okay, actually, if someone else is doing it, that person will be inspired by them. But what are we trying to do every day so people can be more inspired by Krishna through us, right? So we should really look at that, taking this, sadhana as a responsibility, so that other people can develop faith and confidence in ourselves and in Krishna. So really the take home is that, because, and again, this when people see us as reliable, this is really what is in reference to good sadachar, right? Sadachar means our character and our behavior. So good sadhana leads to strong sadachar. Because if we have good sadhana, if we have seva and we have sangha, but if we're falling on sadhana, if we're falling on the level of character and behavior, this is where everything goes wrong in spiritual life, right? So we should see the importance of sadachar in our life, and that the strong sadhana, along with seva and sangha, are these pillars for that good, that strong behavior and character. So that was the second component of regularity. The third is attentiveness. So when people think of attentiveness, what do they think about?
Listening to what they're chanting.
Yeah, so good. That's very good. Attention. So this is in fact when we develop, so this word, again, Vaishnavu always likes to break down the words. He specifically demarcates the word attention and intention. So there's two words, but they actually come from the same Latin word. And he speaks to this point that when we give attention to something, that in fact our faith grows, and then in fact what happens when that faith grows, we do things with more intention, right? With more intent. So that both of these words, when we attention and intention, they both feed off of each other. From attention, intention grows, and when our intention develops stronger, we actually develop more attention, right? So that both these terms are connected to each other. And that we have to understand that in our Bhakti Shastras, not only is it explains that attention is our most valuable asset, right? You've all come here today, you're giving you're trying your best to give your full attention, because it's from that full intention that we really, all the change in our life first starts with giving our attention to something. And that this is our most valuable asset, right? We always say that, I always like to tell people that, in fact, people may see resources and finances as the most valuable asset, but no, in fact, our faith that comes from our attention, that's in fact the most valuable asset, because if we have that, everything else can come from it. Everything can come from faith and attention. And so, the Bhakti Shastras, it talks about that the human being, it must actually progress to actually progress. It in fact has to study well the science of how to invest our attention in order to achieve the highest return, right? So it's very natural for us to want to derive the best result out of the effort we're putting in. But there's a whole science that our Bhakti, that our Bhakti Shastras talk about, how we can talk about improving our attention. So a simple, a very practical and simple way. How do we, in our sadhana, if we had to pick one way to improve our attention, what would it be in our sadhana? Simple.
When you perform your sadhana with the emotion of love,
Yeah.
it becomes easier.
Yeah, so having feeling, right? We're human beings, so we have feeling. So with feelings, right?
Yeah.
Some bhav, some feeling there.
Loving devotional
Right.
service. Once we put love into it, we become enthusiastic.
Yeah, and sometimes we may not have that love that we have for Krishna, but we all have a mother, a father, we all have children, we all have siblings. We reflect on that feeling, and then we use those feelings, as a way as a starting point to connect, right? Those feelings are really important, because if we don't have that feeling, that's in fact what differentiates Bhakti Yoga from all the different types of yoga, jnana, karma, right? Is that feeling component. So that's really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And the other thing I was thinking about is just the simple act of just trying to do our sadhana in the morning time. The morning, we see that just changing the environment, and the morning being, we know, is in sattva, right? Automatically our mind becomes more peaceful, and that we have better control of our mind, which we know Krishna describes. It's like wild horses, right? That are just striving to fulfill our senses. So we have to use nature. We have to use what Krishna has given us, God given, as just natural ways of living. We can do that to improve our attention and our intention, right? And Krishna, we should remember, he's very practical. He's very practical. We see in 8.7 of the Gita, Krishna says, "Ma manusmara yudhyacha," right? He says, "Remember me in the fight," right? And so in that, if we remember in that verse, he says, Arjuna, therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without a doubt. So the reason I bring up this verse is to show that Krishna's words, the advice that he's imparting to Arjuna is very practical. It doesn't mean that, again, because we're living our life and that we all have some occupations, we have material duties, right? But remember that swadharma should always be parallel to our sanatana dharma, right? That swadharma of fulfilling our duties and responsibilities should always be alongside. And Krishna is saying that you can do both at the same time, no problem. He's saying, and Arjuna's occupation is on the battlefield as a warrior. Ours, we have so many different types of duties of work. We have family responsibilities. But again, he's saying that remember me in the fight. And if we look at this world that we live in as our battlefield, that same exact words can apply to us, right? And again, furthermore, in Bhagavad Gita, I'm just taking different references. In 635, if we need to try to control the mind, in Krishna, he gives two very practical points of how do we improve our, this attentiveness of the mind. He gives, in 635, he says two words, abhyasen and vairagyen, right? So he says that by suitable practice and detachment, right? These are the two words that Krishna uses in 635 of the Gita. that it requires this practice and it requires some letting go, some detachment. And so this year we were reviewing this because, again, we're trying to understand better how we can improve our attention. You know, we talked about having feelings, we talked about using the time in the day, trying to, you know, again, ideally in the morning. I know that's for me always something that I'm trying to improve, how much you know, dedicated and focused sadhana we can do in the morning, because we know we've all experienced the impact, the positive impact it has in our day. But again, remembering that intention and attention, they're both connected, and that we need both. We need both to be able to gain more attention. So that was attention. Now the fourth component, Vaishnaprabhu talks about, that comes in Sadhana, is goal setting, right? Does anyone at the beginning of the new year try to set a goal? Anybody? Yeah. And a lot of times, who has set goals that have been hard to meet? Yeah. Yeah, so it's okay. I mean, we all fall into that trap. So I want everyone, just for us to just explore within ourselves that, you know, spiritually, just related to our sadhana, I wanted us to at least give us the time here to think together that, you know, based on where you're at, what is just one goal, at least from a sadhana perspective, that you would like to, you know, work on. You know, everyone can keep it to themselves, but again, just taking this opportunity just to think, and a lot of people, they know right away because it's something that's been brewing inside of them for a long time. They're like, you know, I should be maybe reading a little bit more, I should be maybe doing my sadhana in the morning, I should be chanting all my rounds, I should be maybe even doing it, you know, maybe less, but just regularly, whatever it may be, right? But we all have some burning inclination with us that we really want to put into application, right? And Vaishnaprabhu, he specifically says that that having spiritual goals is very important, because as a living entity, it helps us narrow our focus. We need that focus, and that he specifically speaks about that it's very important that Shastra talks about how we need to acquire spiritual assets, Devi Sampat, right? It talks about this acquisition of spiritual assets. And these acquisition of spiritual assets comes in the association of devotees hearing, you know, associating with advanced sadhus, right? These are the spiritual assets, because when we want to pray to Krishna for pure devotional service, you know, ultimately we have to have something to offer to get that pure devotional service. And what we're offering is that Devi Sampat, is those spiritual assets, right? So we have to acquire it. So we have to make the endeavor to acquire spiritual assets. And so therefore, he's speaking about this point of acquiring assets because, again, the importance of goals, having a goal, again, we're just wanting to take everyone, I mean, if anyone doesn't mind, do people mind sharing what their one goal related to their sadhana would like to be in this 2023? Does anyone want to share? Everyone's being shy today.
To try and chant at a consistent time, so that my mind knows to get into the zone.
Good. So just consistency around time of day and chanting. So that's one thing. Anybody else wanted to share, please?
Learning more and more from Gita.
Learning more and more from Gita, yes. And Prabhu, it's so nice that you mentioned this point. One of the reasons I was bringing it with me, but one of the reasons I wanted to bring this book, Our Family Business, encourage people to read this book, is that a lot of times we have different topics that we read, just the worldly world, like, we all maybe read books on habit formation, on goal setting and different things. But Shri has all packaged it in this book, Our Family Business. But what's amazing is that he's taken all the gems from different shastras like Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, and so many things that I'm sharing today are just things that the jewels that he's picked out. And so you're saying learning about from Gita, it's a very practical way, because we may have our interest, but sometimes we don't know where to look in the shastra. He's really nicely just unpacked everything for us. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else had a goal that they wanted to share? Relate?
I'd like to share something.
Please.
I personally, found out like if, like I want to be fixed in my chanting or in my reading, whatever, but then after an hour or two, something happens, and then like what happened to my Krishna consciousness. So what I do now, I do a check. I have a checkpoint. Every hour, I look at the clock. I said, okay, I'll give myself an hour to see what happens. And I started to grow better in my consciousness, my chanting. And when that hour finishes, I take another hour. And like this until at night. You do it, like you check your consciousness and so it really helps.
It's really powerful. So you're
Yeah.
basically creating an hourly checkpoint for yourself.
Right.
Of your consciousness, of your mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful because so much of what sometimes we can do is, is external. It becomes mechanical because sometimes our mind is disconnected with what we're doing. Sometimes our heart is not there. So I really appreciate this point of just creating a checkpoint for ourselves to reassess our mind and our heart and where our consciousness is at with whatever activity we may be doing, whether it be serving our family members or doing our sadhana, doing our work. It's really, really powerful. Thank you.
We kind of grow in this way, the way like it helps us with our goal.
Yeah.
Eventually, little by little.
Yeah,
Step
and
at
again,
a
you're
time.
creating a different practical suggestion for how we can improve our attention and our intention.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is great. Anybody else wanted to share on a goal that they may have related to their sadhana in 2023? I know for myself, I'll be working harder to be more consistent at waking up earlier in the morning, because I find that it's like if you can just wake up like earlier in the morning and your sadhana starts morning, like so much of your day just follows that, that elevated. It's like being at the top of the mountain in the morning, and then it's just like a smooth way down all the way, right? So I know for me that's something that I'm going to be very much focusing on, which just means, again, attention to details. Which means what am I doing the night before around that time? How am I setting myself up for the morning? So that's something for myself. And then the last component that I wanted just to reflect on that I think is really important for us to think about is Vaishnavu, he speaks about this last point related to strong sadhana. And it's this idea of, where is it? It's this idea of acting based on one's capacity, right? And so the idea of essentially what he's trying to say in this component, this part here, is that based on one's own, like where we have to see each other as all individuals and act from the platform we're at. And so really this area really gets at the point as devotees and sadhakas. Sometimes we fall in this trap of comparing ourselves to others, right? And in Bhagavad Gita, this point is really well laid out. Krishna mentions this idea twice, both in the 3rd chapter and I think the 14th chapter. But in 335, Krishna says here, "It is far better to discharge one prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duty perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's duty is better than engaging in another duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous." And so this point here is that we really must all, it's always really important to have devotees that are further along the way to inspire us, right? But we don't want to artificially put ourselves in a place where we're not, right? So it's very important, again, as part of our making our sadhana strong, to just acknowledge where we're at, and to also to be accepting of it, and two, based on our own taste, then to take inspiration from that. So again, he's really emphasizing this point of really trying to reflect on what is our level, where are we at, and what is our natural next step. And I thought that was a very practical point because, again, we all have sometimes very lofty things that we'd like to accomplish. Even, when Mataji was saying about this being conscious at every hour, for me, I think to start, I would need to, in fact, try to do it just for like 6 hours of the day, because, I know that it's hard to do it even for 12, so let me just start with something smaller. and this is the point that Shri Guru is getting at. You know, he very much has everyone heard this term, become a sage page by page, right? So this is very much helps us allow to approach the Shastra in a way that doesn't overwhelm us, because we see these books and sometimes there's a lot of pages to read, right? So then what by Shri Guru, he wanted to read the Bhagavatam in a year. He saw a lot of devotees doing this. He's like, you know, how can I do that with my life that I have? And so what he did, he's counted every single page in the Bhagavatam, and then he divided by days, right? So you need to read 40 pages of the Bhagavatam every day for the whole year to finish the entire Bhagavatam in a year. And so the point of this, of just explaining this principle, is that taking a small piece towards the bigger goal is much more sustainable for us, and it gives us confidence, it gives us enthusiasm by starting small. You know, again, that 1% change every day accumulates to be a significant amount, but we just have to try to look at that 1%. So that was the last point that I wanted to leave everyone with. So we could just review the different components we talked about. So what were the 5 different aspects we spoke about for helping to rediscover a strong sadhana?
Attitude.
So we talked about first about attitude, and the attitude components were?
Strictness, seriousness, and
And
sincerity.
perfect. And then the second aspect of strong sadhana we talked about?
Regularity.
Regularity, right? So trying to be consistent, even whatever small piece that we have. But again, remember we said that from consistency and regularity, that faith grows, we become pure, and we develop those attractive qualities. The third aspect we talked about?
Intention versus.
Yeah, so attentiveness and intention, and the importance of, remember that attentiveness is our most valuable asset, and that we have to, you know, as best possible, try our best, you know, to use, you know, again, we talked about morning time, we talked about having feelings, use the things that are natural to us to help improve our attentiveness, because we need that feeling, and we need to use what Krishna has given us to improve that attention. The fourth we talked about was
Goal setting.
goal setting, right? To have some goal, and hopefully we shared, everyone picked, you know, a few goals or a goal that they wanted to focus on. And then the last thing we talked about is acting based on one's capacity. So knowing where you're at, making goals, and then trying to take a small piece of that big chunk. Anyone have any questions or comments they wanted to share before the conch flows?
I think we should end up with begging. We have to beg for Krishna's kripa, mercy, to perform all these, right?
Yeah.
What mercy we can.
For sure, prayers here, and you know, we're seeking the prayers of our Guru Parampara, that everything we, you know, shared today we can as best apply in our life, and you know, to overcome the obstacles as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Hare Krishna. Shri Prabhupada ki